Joining me now is Tim Morgan, founder and CTO of DeepSurface Security. Tim, thanks so much for joining us today on the Dark Reading News Desk.
Hey Terry, nice to talk to you again.
It's good to see you. It seems just weeks ago.
Yeah,
Well,
time flies.
Appreciate you doing this. We're talking about vulnerability management, and it's certainly a timely topic. Talk a bit about how you've seen vulnerability management change over the past few decades.
Well, honestly, Terry, I'm not sure that it has fundamentally, and that's really concerning. I mean, so I guess going back to 2002, it was my first security job. I was working on a vulnerability management team, and my job was really to assess the vulnerabilities that came out every month, understand the technical specifics of how somebody could exploit them, how it mattered to our environment, how it affected our software and our environment, and then we'd provide recommendations to the IT team on when we thought the issue should be fixed, right? 7 days, 30 days, a quarter out. And usually there was a little bit of negotiation. The IT team would say, okay, certain items need to be pushed off. Well, one month there was a specific vulnerability that came out that I felt really strongly was a serious problem. And IT pushed back on it, and they said, no, we don't need to fix this for a month or two. Well, 2 weeks later, a worm came out, and it got in our environment.
Wow.
And we spent 24 hours cleaning it up, 24 hours straight. And so, of course, I could just walk away and say, okay, I told you so. But what that really highlighted is that we didn't have an objective process to understanding the risk of vulnerabilities, right? Back in 2002. Well, I got out of vulnerability management, and I did a lot of other things. But then, fast forward 15 years, and the volume of vulnerabilities had increased by tenfold. I mean, it's growing exponentially,
Sure.
right? And when I started looking at how some of my customers were doing the vulnerability management and the risk assessment, it hadn't changed. It hadn't fundamentally changed in 15 years, and yet we're dealing with a huge number of vulnerabilities. And so, for me, that really propelled us to start DeepSurface and figure out how can we fix this problem.
Well, what do you make of that? I mean, automation has come along as a panacea, as a cure-all. Is automation making a dent in this? I mean, how can we change up the conversation, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, well, I think what people have focused on is, instead of understanding the risk of vulnerabilities, why don't we just patch everything? So then they try to automate all the patching as quickly as they can. But that ends up not working in a lot of environments, because certain things are just hard to patch, and they're likely to cause issues. They're likely, in manufacturing or in hospital environments, you simply can't patch things all the time. It will cause problems. So I think, depending on the organization, they run up against problems with that.
In that vein, some security teams are adopting risk-based approaches to vulnerability management. Can you talk a bit about what's driving that?
Yeah, well, I mean, risk-based vulnerability management is really just looking at vulnerabilities and figuring out which ones actually matter to your organization, right? Taking that holistic view of what matters and what should I start with, instead of just trying to fix everything, focusing on what matters. So of course it's attractive as the volume of issues grows. People want to start focusing on what matters. But I think a lot of people struggle also with the fact that when systems are hard to patch, then IT might push back, or business units might push back on the fixes, and so then they really need to justify, why am I asking for these fixes? And so if you have a much more formal methodology of estimating risk, then you can have a better justification for that. So I think those are a few things that are driving risk-based approaches.
Well, it strikes me as you converge risk management and vulnerability management, you're adding context and prioritization to the mix.
Right.
Does that change the conversation that you were referring to earlier?
Yeah, I think so, and I think if you can tell a really good story about why you're asking for specific fixes, right, then you can have a much more, your IT team, your business units, and security can be rowing in the same direction.
How well do security teams understand how to measure risks? This has typically been the purview of boards of directors, and that's what they're hired and paid to do.
Sure.
But with the greater network complexity, with the advent of cloud, how well equipped are security professionals really to assess risk in this much broader context?
Yeah, I think most security engineers, even your newest hires, understand fundamentally that you can't fix everything, and you need to focus on what matters. And of course, it's attractive for everyone to be looking at risk as better risk measures, I guess. I think the trouble with more complex environments, as we've seen, is that each time a new technology comes out, people end up having to buy the latest security tool that addresses that one technology. So each of these different risk approaches is being applied in a silo, right? We have a completely different place where we're trying to measure risk, and each of them approaches it from a different angle. And so you can't, like, even if you took all these tools and pooled all the information in one place, you'd be, trying to add up apples and oranges, right? They look at things differently, so you can't fundamentally just throw it all together. And so I think, really, the thread, I think, that connects everything, and the thing that people need to focus on when it comes to assessing risk holistically, is that they need to answer the question, who has access to what? Where? Everywhere. Yeah. Who has access? Because if my workstation gets compromised and I'm a cloud architect, then it might have been one person's job to secure my workstation, but it's another person's job to secure the cloud. Well, you need to connect those dots, sure, right? And so that's the thread that if you use that and focus on that, and then put vulnerabilities in that context, you can have a much better idea as to what matters. And I think that's actually the single most important thing when it comes to risk estimation of vulnerabilities. Who has access and who is at risk because of that vulnerability.
Tim, shifting gears a bit, we were talking about automation a few minutes ago. Mm-hmm. This has become a code word in the security industry for artificial intelligence or machine learning. Is that the case with DeepSurface?
Yeah, sure, but I mean, when it comes to AI and ML, they're really just fancy algorithms that allow you to automate things.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, and so here's a really simple example. So suppose you have an expert who does a tedious task every day, and that expert needs to have a lot of knowledge to do that task, but at the end of the day, it's a tedious task. You could have that expert write a program which then automates it for them, and then you'd be better off. But maybe that expert is not a programmer, right? And so what AI and ML allow you to do is take a bunch of examples of what that expert has done and automatically create the algorithm. The issue with that is once you spit out that algorithm, it is a black box. It doesn't tell you how it came to the answer. And so if you're just throwing AI and ML at something, then you're going to have an issue. Understanding and really communicating to the IT team, communicating to the board why you made that decision. And so the way DeepSurface approaches this is we create a holistic threat model of the customer's environment, which is really easy to understand. Anybody who's even non-technical can understand how an attacker would be traversing this hacker roadmap. Then we use AI and ML to automate the construction of that roadmap. So that's how we're leveraging it to actually kind of get the best of both worlds.
You mentioned the role of risk management. CISOs are under increasing pressures to communicate and help their boards understand security posture, the ROI on risk reduction, really the business of security at the executive level. Do you have any thoughts about how CISOs can better communicate not just risks, but also the extending vulnerabilities to the board when they present this sort of information?
Sure. Well, I mean, I've worked in security a long time, but only in the last few years have I had the opportunity to try to run a company. And so I have a different perspective now on how somebody a board might view the security program. And so with my, I guess boards really understand risk, okay? That's what they do. They minimize risk for the organization. They just don't know the technical specifics. Boards also are hearing about vulnerabilities all the time. They know vulnerability management is really important. And so I think anything a CISO can do to tie really good risk metrics to the vulnerability management program, the better time they're going to have trying to communicate to the board and helping them understand what the issues are. So I do think it's really important to approach it from that angle, but there's a lot of nuances to that.
What's your sense? Are boards getting smarter about this? Are they just more aware, or are they also really getting to grips with the particular challenges when you intersect business concerns and business management with the technology and with the networks that we all rely on?
Yep. Yeah, I think boards are pretty sophisticated in a lot of ways. At least, some board members will understand security at a lot deeper level than you might expect. One time I was in the middle of an incident and I was helping people, get out of a bad breach. And an executive asked me, "So how's our password hashing?" I was like, "Oh, well, that's a good question." And more recently, we've gotten a lot of really technical questions on how we measure risk. And so I do think it's important to be able to justify what it is you're doing to measure that risk. So yeah, I do think so.
Tim, we appreciate you joining us today on the Dark Reading News Desk. Thanks again for doing this.
Thanks, Terry. Take care.
We've been talking to Tim Morgan, founder and CTO of DeepSurface Security.